Wonderful to be here, everybody. Thanks so much. I think this will be a good transition from Matt's talk, which was talking about generative AI in science, and now we'll talk about generative AI in the arts and entertainment. So I'm going to start with this example from last summer that emerged seemingly from nowhere called The Velvet Sundown. This was in July. Some of you may have heard of it in the news. This band quickly gained traction online. At their peak, they had about 750,000 monthly listeners on Spotify. They had a band bio that described the members and their stories, narratives around the band. They had several albums. They had a merch. They were playing on rooftops like the Beatles, playing in their tour bus. They even had a Twitter page that when you asked the page if the Velvet Sundown was AI, it defended itself and as a real band, as real humans who compose their own music. So Rolling Stone, some other outlets investigated, and eventually the person behind the Velvet Sundown came forward, admitted that all the sounds and images were all AI generated. Now, there are a variety of things that are interesting about this case, but I use it to frame a conversation about how someone might decide to shortcut the music-making process. The person behind the Velvet Sundown, they didn't need songwriters, they didn't need recording studios, they didn't need musical knowledge, and they didn't need human collaborators. So what's interesting to me here is that this is a process of automation, something that Matt spoke about just a second ago. It demonstrates that we can automate parts of the creative process with these powerful generative AI tools. And this isn't unfamiliar to musicians. There's a lot of automation that goes on in the recording studio. Right now, musicians can use generative AI tools to simplify some kinds of workflows, produce distinctive sounds, isolate sounds in existing tracks. They can mimic voices. And like we saw in the example, they can create entire songs out of whole cloth with instrumentation, vocals, all those kinds of things. So there are a variety of tools that musicians use to automate the music-making process. So on the one hand, we could conceptualize generative AI as automation. We can see how it's historically consistent with past waves of automation. So in an article I published with my colleagues Ziraj Murthy and Sam Baker, we talk about generative AI as this great tool for capitalism, right? That we get more efficiency, we get more productivity, we get more avenues for profit extraction. These are all things that we've seen in the past. And we could think of recorded music as a form of automation, right? Recorded music allowed us to replicate the sounds of human musicians in a room. People were worried at the time that live music would become a thing of the past. So from this perspective, we could say, well, maybe generative AI is just another iteration of automating creative works. But that, at the same time, is a bit reductive, right? So at the same time, my colleagues and I also argued that generative AI can be seen as a step change in scale, both because of the speed and what it produces. So not only is generative AI more efficient, it's fast, it's content on demand, it's nearly immediate. And all we need to do, of course, is prompt an AI, and we can create an entirely new song. The second thing that's interesting here is that generative AI, it's not just a replication, right? It's not the same as a copy of an album. It is a mimic. It mimics human performance and human characteristics. Then it projects them back to us. This is what Nancy Catherine Hales refers to as a crisis of representation, the idea that it blurs the lines between humans and machine, and because of that, we're faced with existential questions like, what is creativity if it can be automated? And can we humans be replaced? And then finally, related to this idea of mimicry, generative AI conveys a sort of derivative novelty. It's derivative in the sense that we train it on this corpus of human content and get it to produce something derived from that. But it also has its own spin, its own aesthetic. It's not just a replication. Generative AI produces its own thing. So framing generative AI tools both as more of the same and a step change in scale contextualizes these tools as inherently power-laden in our culture and society. It introduces huge questions for existing creative workers who already work in precarious fields where it's difficult to make a living. How do they compete with these tools? How do they potentially integrate them? How do they resist them if they want to? And this is really what my empirical research asks. what are working musicians supposed to do when a machine can generate an entire composition and it's only going to get better at doing so? So what I want to do now is transition into a little bit of the empirical work and give you a few examples of what I'm seeing in the field. I'm working on an in-depth qualitative study of the music industry, and I see a variety of ways so far that musicians are responding. One of the things I see is a salient fear of replacement. This isn't true of everyone, but those folks who compose commercial music, particularly, who have their own home recording studios, they do things for advertisements or for video games, things like that, they see themselves as replaceable. Don't put me out of work, one musician said to me when I just told him that I was studying AI in music. So there's this real worry from a lot of musicians that AI is going to diminish the very few avenues they have for making a living. But some musicians embrace AI tools. One musician I worked with told me that an advantage of AI is that it doesn't have any ego and that it does what you want. This person went on to say that working with another human introduces all sorts of feelings, all sorts of complications that they didn't want to deal with. So for this person, one advantage of AI being able to mimic people is that it does so without emotion. And it allowed them to individualize their workflow and avoid human collaboration. A third example is this interesting group that I'm writing a paper about right now who really anthropomorphized AI. They describe personifying it, that their aim was to communicate the soul of the AI and what it's trying to sing. So for this group, AI was like the songwriter and they were the producers. They really centered on the AI. So this research is ongoing. I have a lot more field work to do. My aim in the coming months is to collect 30 more interviews, and I really want to take a music industry ecosystems approach, or what I'm referring to as that. So not only focus on what musicians are doing specifically about these tools, but how platforms and grassroots music organizations shift and respond to generative AI tools. I really want to get a variety of responses to generative AI across a number of perspectives. If you know anyone that would be interested in talking to me, please let me know. So I want to wrap up here by just returning to that Velvet Sundown example and grappling with the implications. If the Velvet Sundown is an anomaly, then it's no big deal, right? But imagine the Velvet Sundown at scale. Imagine examples such as this at scale. In September, Spotify removed millions of AI-generated songs. The Velvet Sundown is still on there. The potential is that these tools enable a media landscape where even more derivative content than we already have can become the norm. I'm confident that humans will always create art, but whether or not we decide to create an environment that values and cultivates working artists is a different question. Quickly, I just want to thank some research collaborators across Good Systems who helped me on different projects about creative work and musicians. And happy to take any questions. Please feel free to link with me on LinkedIn. Thanks.
Hi, thank you so much. So the thing that strikes me is the whole lack of collaboration and human engagement, which is sort of where human growth comes from.
Yeah.
And is there a concern, or what do we do about that, or do we have to just become lumps of clay? Where are we going with that?
Yeah, I am extremely worried about that. I think that one of the things that we even see across music before generative AI is a push toward DJ work, right? There's a lot of DJs who kind of get up and do the music on their own by themselves. There's nothing wrong with that inherently, but having this system where we further individualize ourselves and kind of insulate ourselves from working with others, I think is a real danger. In general, it goes back to the idea that we hold these two tensions, that it's more the same and it's different at the same time, right? That we've been individualizing ourselves for a very, very long time. And we think less about collaboration and more about the single person who's doing the thing or who's in charge of the thing. So hopefully, generative AI won't make that worse, or people will make different kinds of decisions about their collaborative work and decide that they need that tension. But I'm not sure that the majority of people will do that, particularly if they're being rewarded financially for not doing that. Yeah.
Thanks. We have time for one more question.
This is more of a sort of a comment to trigger see what kind of response I get.
Sure.
Your visuals. So we were talking about musicians, people who perform through sound.
Yeah.
Your visuals look like they were all AI generated, and so that
Okay.
Were they? And I'm interested in your perspective on that. Of like, is there a threshold where creative works are monotonous, like people
Yeah.
who work in creative industry, and then there's a threshold where, where they become creative, and how you think about that?
Yeah, certainly the Velvet Sundown pictures were AI generated.
Well, some of the other clip art that was not.
Yeah, I mean, I just pull images when I'm putting a
Yeah.
PowerPoint together from Google, so fair enough, yeah.
So I'm thinking, anyway, I think you get the
Yeah,
question.
yeah. Is there,
Well, so I'm interested in the perspective on that, right? So
Yeah.
as a working creative, sometimes you're doing stuff that's really original and creative. Other times you're doing stuff that pays
Yes.
the bills, like
Absolutely.
you're a visual artist and you're making some clip art for somebody.
Yeah.
And the robots are getting quite good at automating that menial stuff that
Yes.
some of us
Yeah.
get money from.
and we're all part of the system that we're all helping to contribute to it. On the one hand, I don't know how many academics are in the room, but one of the things that I think about with generative AI and using it as a writing tool is that we've gone from a culture where we used to have to go to the library to do our dissertations. Now we have to have like 10 publications in order to get a job in our field of choice. 10, 15 years from now, do we have to have 30 publications, 40 publications? Like, when do we stop? And the thing about productivity is that it just keeps supercharging the kind of work that we do. And I'm guilty of it as well. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Jared.
Thanks.